Right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We know there's all sorts of things you could have chosen to do with your time, and we really, really appreciate you being here with us. So, by way of introduction, I am Nancy Mendoza. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Canary. I'm joined tonight by activist and presenter Dan Glass for a screening of a short film that we've made together with Dan and a Q&A afterwards about the weaponisation of anti-Semitism against the left. Dan is the grandson of 4 Holocaust survivors, 2 from Germany and 2 from Poland. He says, the last thing I'm ever going to let happen is that my grandparents' story and what they went through be weaponised to oppress other people. Yet, when Jews like myself and like Dan stand up for the rights of Palestinians, we have been told we're anti-Semitic, we're self-hating, and the lowest of all Jews. Just today on Twitter, I've been harassed, I've been called names, and just because I shared a photo of my family's lit Hanukkah menorah alongside a celebration of Jeremy Corbyn's new project for peace and justice. And of course, many of you will have really been aware of this morning's debacle on LBC Radio with Keir Starmer. Possibly the least said about that, the better at this point, but we can get into that later if it is something people want to talk about. That's not all, though. Over recent weeks, we've had vexatious reporting of tweets from socialist accounts. Most of those belong to Jews and people of colour, and that's led to multiple suspensions from Twitter. One example saw our editor-at-large at the Canary, Mendoza, suspended for having the temerity to tweet her own email address. This was closely followed by a claim from none other than Tracy-Ann Oberman of TV fame that Kerry-Ann had been forced to take down all tweets pertaining to her. This is untrue. It just isn't true. It didn't happen. It's not true. These tactics are the latest in the weaponisation of anti-Semitism by those who oppose socialism and pro-Palestinian activism. Ultimately, this cynical project to oust Jeremy Corbyn and the socialist left of the Labour Party also seeks to define any criticism of the State of Israel or participation in the BDS, that's Boycott to Divestment and Sanctions movement, as anti-Semitic. Something that most Jews would argue is nonsense. But as we'll see in this short film, accusations of anti-Semitism against the left have absolutely nothing to do with the oppression of Jews. After the film, Dan Glass is going to join me for a question and answer session, and you can go ahead and put your questions to Dan in the comments. So without further ado, let's watch this short film. Wow. Just going to take a moment to let that settle. Powerful stuff. And thank you to Dan for the shout out at the end, of course. We very much appreciate that. Oh, okay. So, just to mention that you saw some clips there from a film that Dan presented with Redfish. It's available on the Redfish YouTube channel. A little bit about them. They say, we are in favour of people taking charge of their own destinies against military and economic wars for profit and against racism. We believe in equality for all, regardless of gender, sexuality, range of abilities, age, and religion. I think something I want to just add a little bit before we go to Dan. So Dan mentioned that Jews are taught the principle of tikkun olam, which encourages us to take responsibility for the well-being of society, and it invites us to work for social justice. In fact, in the Torah, we're told no fewer than 36 times that we must not oppress the stranger. And the thing that I always come back to, this is a quote from my family's Passover Haggadah. During that festival, we're reminded that we were slaves in the land of Egypt. And with that in mind, we're told, you shall not subvert the rights of the stranger or the orphan. So you'll find a great tradition in Judaism of fighting for and with oppressed people. And many Jews find the idea that criticisms of Israel or pro-Palestinian activism should be considered anti-Semitic pretty ridiculous. So I'm going to bring Dan in for tonight's Q&A session. I'm going to press a button and hopefully he shall appear. Ta-da! It's great, this technology business, isn't it?
Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you. Hopefully the listeners online across Facebook, YouTube and Twitter simultaneously, I should add. So I think I'm going to take chair's privilege and ask the first question, if that's all right.
Yeah, please do.
So it's kind of a question, kind of a statement, but my fear is that all of this actually undermines the real instances of anti-Semitism that we face, particularly in the UK. And I certainly do not want any kid to experience what I did on my school bus in Somerset when I was told that I should have been gassed with the rest of them. My fear is that by weaponizing anti-Semitism in this way, by using the tactics like we've seen on Twitter this last couple of weeks, that somehow dilutes the real meaning of anti-Semitism. Is that a concern that you share?
Yeah, big time. And thank you for raising that, Nancy, and sorry that you went through that. I think what's going on in terms of weaponization does a disservice on every level, both to the realities and the integrity of our situation when we face genuine anti-Semitic attacks. It dilutes it. And then people don't know what's real or what's fake or what's fake news or what's a hit job. It dilutes the real gravity and the trauma that comes from facing anti-Semitism, as well as totally misinterprets and tangles up the reality of when we stand up for Palestinian rights. So it's a disservice on both accounts. And I think it's the delicate balance, both as Jews, as anyone who's been affected by hate crime, to really see through what's going on. And clarity is everything when it comes to the truth, when it comes to the weaponization of anti-Semitism, so we can stand up for the rights of everyone, and really see what's going on in terms of anti-Semitism and also what's going on in terms of the continuation of the colonial project.
Yeah. I think so. We've got a question that I think follows on from that quite nicely, actually, which is it's from Paul, and Paul's asking essentially, how do we know if anti-Semitism is actually on the rise? I think what he's asking is, are the data being affected by these kind of fake smears, the outright lies, and the sort of, the clip that we saw of you in Berlin reporting that you'd overheard somebody talking about BDS. How can we actually get a handle on whether anti-Semitism is on the rise?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Paul. Obviously my specific context here in the film that was presenting it in Berlin, so there will obviously be parallels here in terms of the research and the reporting on hate crime. In London, for example, you've got amazing projects like Gallup, which look at hate crime, all kinds of hate crime. So it's about connecting with hate crime reporting organizations as separate from what's going on with the toxicity of the weaponization of anti-Semitism, because we want to do justice to both, and also where the root cause of the hate crime is coming from, and where it's being emboldened from as well, whether it's from white racists, white fascists. Whereas, as we've seen in the film, in the wider film, do watch the whole film as well on the Redfish website, where we've seen that like Thomas Sandel did, blaming hate crime on the Muslim population, which is just untrue, which is Islamophobic, xenophobic, colonialist, white supremacist. It's just untrue. When we're looking at where hate crime is, the rise of hate crime is coming from in Germany, it is the white supremacists. So again, in the spirit of Tikkun Olam, it's like we stand always in solidarity with our Muslim family. And the moment they say that it's hate crime is coming from the Muslim population, when it's just untrue, it's coming from the Christian evangelical white supremacist far right. So yeah, that was a long way of saying connect with hate crime reporting organizations which have a good established record.
So we can get data from the reports from those organisations, and also if we're aware of incidents of anti-Semitism, they are the places to go to report them.
And yeah, just like in terms of friends and loved ones who have had genuine anti-Semitic attacks, equally fight as hard to protect them and protect their story and their freedoms as we do for people affected by injustice across the world.
Yeah. I think there's a real danger, isn't there, of this kind of hierarchy of oppression in a lot of this. It scares me quite a lot, I think. You know, and actually talking about white supremacy, I think we could probably. I'm just checking if we've got any other questions. Lots of agreeing noises from people. People enjoyed the film, which is great. We've got an invitation to Carrie Ann to do a podcast. I'll make a note of that. Thank you very much. So today I was actually listening to this live. I don't normally listen to LBC, but Carrie Ann had put it on this morning. Oh, I should mention, in case people don't know, it's not a coincidence that Carrie Ann and I have the same surname. We are married. She nicked my surname. I'm the Mendoza. It's a Sephardi Jewish name. So yeah, listening to LBC this morning, and a caller rang in, and just, I mean, paraphrasing, she essentially said, white people in the UK are going to become a minority by 2066. Israel gives Jews the right to self-determination. Why can't white people in the UK have that too? Which was met with essentially stony silence from Keir Starmer. I'm actually just looking now to see whether he's made any kind of response to that. I don't think so. Someone on the chat maybe can correct me if I'm wrong about that, and apologies if I'm not up to date. But I mean, where are we left as left-leaning people who once upon a time, certainly I felt once upon a time, I had a home with the Labour Party. I actually resigned my membership earlier this year because I got so fed up of my lived experience as a Jewish person being weaponised in this way. I know quite a lot of other people have resigned much more recently. I've seen lots of people saying they're going to take their Labour subscription and give it to the new Jeremy Corbyn Peace and Justice project. But you know what Jeremy Corbyn's doing isn't a political party, and it's probably right that it isn't. It's something that political parties of any flavour can affiliate to if they think that it's a good thing. But kind of where does that leave us as left-leaning people, as people who support the rights of Palestinians and all of that?
Do you want me to answer?
Yes.
Yeah,
If
great
you
stuff.
would. Sorry, that
Um,
was a long and meandering question. I apologise. Yeah.
yeah,
Where
no,
do you think? Where's our home now?
sure. I guess first thought is, what was the caller's name who said about white self-determination?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what her name was, but it was someone calling into the Nick Ferrari show on LBC this morning.
I'm just wondering where they live. Have they ever stepped outside their door and seen like how strong white privilege is? If we're talking about, oh, when will white people get to self-determine their reality? Have you stepped outside the door? Um, so okay. I mean, I have so much love and respect for Jewish and other people who have been involved in the Labour Party. And of course, there's tens of thousands of Jews for Labour and or Jews for Palestine, probably hundreds of thousands. And there's so many people in my orbit who I've seen fighting tooth and nail in the forefront of the Labour Party. Shout out to my boyfriend's mum, who's also been very involved. And it's traumatic. It's so traumatic what you've been through and seeing the collateral damage done by the Zionists within the Labour Party, which people have fought from the heart for decades, and it's devastating. I'm not so involved in party politics. I wholeheartedly support Corbyn and everyone in Labour standing up for genuine Jewish and Palestinian rights. I just do not have the patience. I do not have the patience. I just don't. It makes me rage how the Zionist white supremacists have been stealing our truth and our grandparents' truth. I don't have the guts for it. I get too angry. But I have so much love and respect for everyone who has fought that. And now, in response to your question, I think we need to be super specific in how we continue, because we have to have an element of satisfaction. When I say we, that's everyone in the struggle for humanitarian justice, for Palestine, against anti-Semitism, against far-right fascists, which are unfortunately on the rise, as we know. So I think we need to be specific because we need to have tangible successes and levels of satisfaction. That's why I will bang on the BDS drum till the cows come home, and that's a strategy within a huge wider context. I think one thing, something my friend, he was a tour guide in Sachsenhausen concentration camp on the edge of Berlin. Um, and one thing that someone said to him, it was always stuck in my head. Well, actually, quite a few people said this to him when they looked around Sachsenhausen concentration camp. They were like, "How could this happen? This is incomprehensible. I don't know how humans can do this to other humans." And his response was always, "Well, it did happen, and it's up to us to have the clarity and understanding of how it happened, rather than be lost in the blizzard and the trauma and the sadness of the symptoms. We always have to get and dig at the root and be super strategic so that we can get to the other side." And I have done my bits of research about Jewish and queer and other anti-Nazi activism during World War II. And it's strategy, and it's what does the Bible say? Without vision, we shall perish. And there's so much truth in there. And that's why I think we need to put our energies into very successful strategies like BDS. Otherwise, it's, I mean, I've got so much respect and awe of you dealing with the whole Twitter world. Oh my God, I don't really use Twitter because I wouldn't, I find it too much.
Yeah, I think that's a valid position held by a lot of people who don't want to deal with that rubbish. Thank you. Yeah, I think just reflecting on what you're saying, and in some ways, I think it's the old thing, isn't it, where people who don't really want ordinary people to engage with these things make it all sound really complicated and difficult, and you've got to you've got to read thick books and know loads of history and all of that, and actually it's not complicated. It's very, very simple. It's saying it's responding to that question, how can human beings do this, by saying, well, they did, and here are the ways that we make sure that never happens again. And I often feel with these issues that people have a very, very short memory for these things. I mean, our political cycle's what, 5 years at most, And I don't think, or our memory of politics and of social justice and history kind of go much beyond that unless we're pushed. So I think it is important to keep saying, look, this happened. It happened to Jews, yeah, but it also happened to queer people, and it happened to disabled people, and it happened to socialists, and I sit here, I'm Jewish, I'm gay, I'm disabled, I'm married to a woman of color, I grew up in a working class environment, my wife is from a working class background. They're going to come for me first, and that's one of the things that motivates me. Yeah, it's selfish, but it's one of the things that motivates me. But unless I talk about that, unless I talk about why right now with the rise of fascism, I'm scared. I am genuinely scared. I'm not saying this for impact or for effect. Anyone who knows me well will know what my mental health has been like for the last 4 years, and I mean literally the last 4 years, since the EU referendum, since Trump got elected, and then everything that has followed, particularly. So I'm going to keep saying it, and I'm going to keep getting harassed on Twitter, and I will deal with that. Oh, sorry, rant over. Just sort of going back to what you were saying about BDS, we've had a question asking, can you say a little bit more about what BDS is and how that's working to support Palestine?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Oh, Nancy, I've got some responses to what you just said as well. So BDS is God, sorry, moving around. It's inspired by the strategy against apartheid South Africa. And there's been parallels in other places. It's a specific strategy to intervene in the economic context that we're in, which is the military industrial complex, turbo capitalism. You've got to speak in the language of the oppressors, and in this context, it's colonialism and capitalism. So BDS stands for boycotting Israeli apartheid, not Jewish goods. And I loved putting Thomas Sandow on the spot. Oh my god, I could watch that on repeat. That was so much fun. And so it's boycotting a hegemonic regime. And as one of the other contributors in the film says at the end, no state has the right to exist, people have the right to exist. So boycotting and a specific hegemonic regime in this context, Israeli apartheid, asking or demanding or taking action from all institutions who can divest their economic resources from Israeli apartheid. To give one example, I'm against all arms, and particularly weapons being sold to Israel, which the British government does and the German government does in spoons. So I think, and of course, it's no wonder that the German government blindly support the Israeli weapons industry, Israeli apartheid, because guilt is one of the most unproductive emotions, and it can make people blindly offer their support to something which is part of the problem rather than the solution. My friend Ruth, who's an amazing activist, also a Holocaust survivor, who came on the kinder transport from Germany to London, I think, well, you can do the maths about how old they are, is incredible. And one thing she said, which always stuck in my head, is that, yeah, maybe the Holocaust isn't happening now, but the infrastructure that enables the Holocaust still exists.
Absolutely.
Like the arms trade, like the weapons industry, like all the institutions which are maintaining apartheid Israel, the water companies, for example, which, if you can literally see it down one street, for example, in the Jordan Valley, on one side of the street, on the occupied Palestine side is plush streets, plush gardens, plentiful food, and on the other side of the street in Palestine, people do not have the basic fundamental needs like water, food, energy, shelter. It's that stark. So that's the divestment side. And then sanctions is placing sanctions on a hegemonic regime which flagrantly violates the International Human Rights Charter. And this is where I completely agree, Nancy, in terms of it's not that complicated. if we're looking at the enshrinement of fundamental human rights, access to water, food, energy, shelter, let alone the secondary needs of education, love, compassion, then of course it's obvious that the Israeli apartheid regime violates international human rights. So that's why I always bring it back to. So I hope that's an explanation of BDS. Its roots are so beautiful and powerful. And of course, apartheid South Africa is not over by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a specific tool, a very successful tool to challenge the economic context.
Thank you. I just saw, where's it gone? Bear with me, I'm learning this new system. Here we go. Yes, just in response to that, Viv says, I'm sure everyone knows that Nelson Mandela said, we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And I believe Archbishop Desmond Tutu has said similar. So the links are very much there in the minds of the architects of that. We've worked with Andrew Feinstein, who's an ex-ANC MP from South Africa, also Jewish. He's actually one of the people who was suspended from Twitter in the last couple of weeks as part of this wave of vexatious claims. So, yeah, absolutely. We've got plenty of history to learn from and plenty of history to attend to there. Sorry, you said you wanted to come back on some of what I said. Can you remember what that was?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Also, thank you so much for the question, the person who asked the question and pointed about Nelson Mandela, because who are you going to listen to, Keir Starmer or Nelson Mandela? I mean, really, it's no context. In terms of what you were saying, and I totally hear you in terms of being genuinely scared about the rise of the far right. I guess I just wanted to share a few other quotes which bring me a bit of love and strength from a Jewish perspective and from learning from our history. And I've got into the habit of getting tattoos of quotes of things I feel really passionate about. And I've got to stop because I'm in my room. On my hip, I'm not going to show you, is a picture of Arondus Wilhelm, I hope I'm saying it right, who in 1943 was killed by the Nazis. He was a queer anti-fascist activist who blew up a records office in Holland, which had thousands, potentially tens of thousands of potential victims' addresses, Jews, Roma, LGBT plus, etc. So he blew up the records office, therefore potentially saving tens of thousands of lives, maybe my own biological families. And just before he was executed, his last words were, "Let it be known that homosexuals are not cowards." So beautiful. And I was super young as well, was like late 20s, I think. So just the intersections of our oppressions and the courage and the actions that people have taken just bring me strength. The other one on my arm is from Etty Hillesum, who again was Dutch. She was killed in Auschwitz when she was 29. Her diary writings were found in little bits of paper on the side of the train tracks as well as in other places. And she, of course, she's an incredible mystic as well as many other things. And in her diary it says, we may be sad and depressed by what has been done to us. That is only human and understandable. But we ourselves are our own worst enemy if we inflict the pain upon ourselves. I find life beautiful and I feel free. The sky within me is as wide as the stretching above my head. And it just gives me so much strength in this political racist climate, particularly as we see Brexit, what's going to happen at the end of the year. We have to hold these stories of our ancestors so close to our heart to help us push through and continue in their legacy. She always added something else to say, but I'll remember.
I'm very moved by that. There may be a little moistness on my face, slightly. Okay, just checking for more questions. So a few people asking for the link to the redfish video. I've shared that link in the chat across all 3 platforms. So hopefully everyone who wanted that has got it. We've had some questions through from, is it Santi Overton or Santi Overton, asking a few things. Are we aware of the displaced MENA Jews? I assume that's the Middle Eastern and Jews of colour. Yes, absolutely. And some challenges about the idea that BDS directly opposes Israeli statehood, and a feeling that I think a lot of people would sympathise with, that Jewish people have never been, they say, never been safe in the diaspora. I think just my initial response to that is to come back to something that Dan said earlier, which is that, we simplify this to an issue that is about fundamental human rights. And to the quotes that I gave earlier on from my Haggadah, where we say, yeah, absolutely, we know what it is not to feel safe. We know what it is to feel stateless. We know what it is to feel unwelcome, to feel judged, to feel that, we aren't free. But my response to that would never be to then in turn oppress another group. And it isn't, the formation of Israel didn't, the idea of that and the location for it didn't happen suddenly in 1948. This is a project that had already been planned since the late 19th century, and much of the language and much of the way that was done was incredibly racist. It started out with that kind of sentiment, and even just talking to my mum grew up in middle class southwest London. She was born in 1947, and it was absolutely, she grew up in a very liberal family. They weren't, they were progressive, and still what she heard in her community was that there was this kind of empty sand pit in the middle of nowhere in the Middle East that no one was using, and we were going to make Israel, and we were going to cultivate the land and turn it into this kind of paradise that we longed for after the atrocities of the Second World War. And it wasn't really until years later that she really understood what that had meant for the people who had already been there in Palestine, the people whose homes continued to be bulldozed for settlements. So yeah, that's, again, I just come back to, just because I'm oppressed doesn't mean that I'm going to go and nick somebody else's house, basically. And that's a blunt way of putting it, but I am blunt. I'm autistic, so I don't really do subtlety. So yeah, that's kind of my response, Dan. I don't know if you want to reflect on that thing.
Well, I hear you, the caller, when they say that we've never been safe in the diaspora. I mean, I don't agree with that, but I hear the sentiment. And I don't believe that anyone's born evil. I think, and I don't believe in their heart of heart that any Jews truly believe that the occupation of Palestine is a good thing. I truly believe deep down, not just because of our spiritual and our cultural ancestry, but I don't believe humans are evil. So I don't think deep down anyone truly wants apartheid Israel to be happening and for Palestinians to be oppressed. The trauma can have such collateral damage if we don't work with it, if we don't face it, if we don't shine a loving light onto the bits that are in so much pain. And that is not having that sense of belonging. That is living in fear that everyone's out to kill us. Understandable, because that is kind of what happened. And it makes me think, you know, being with my nan in North London 20 years ago, no, 25 years ago, I remember we were in Garfunkel's somewhere, it doesn't matter, Southgate or something like that. And we were sitting there, and I loved my nan to pieces. That was the photo of her that you saw in that clip. You know, like I said, she often, Holocaust survivors and all war survivors come out with their survival stories to their grandchildren first, because they try and protect their children. So me and my sister heard it for the first time, what she went through when she got out of the Warsaw ghetto, how she lived with in a Nazi household as an undercover nanny, what happened when she found out that the war was over. And of course, the war is not over because it's still happening in Palestine. That's, yeah. So anyway, we were in Garfunkel's, and the waitress was slow, and she was probably about my age, I don't know, 16. This is probably like, I don't know, stoned or hungover, like we all were. And my nan, she holds my arm, and she was like, we have to go now. She knows we're Jewish. And just, we left before we had even ordered anything, because my nan thought that she was out to get us. And I was like, okay. And I get it, obviously, from what she went through as a 17-year-old in the Warsaw ghetto. And that relates to the point about thinking that we're never safe. But if we're going to be our own worst enemy in terms of thinking that everyone's out to get us, we have to be our own best friend and unravel the trauma, the internalized trauma, the deep conditioning of fear, and somehow turn that into love and compassion for ourselves and our neighbors. You know, I live in Tower Hamlets, where my Polish grandparents first came to, like a lot of the Jewish Holocaust survivors, which is now, I think, 90% predominantly Bangladeshi neighborhood. And you hear all this crap, all this rubbish of Muslims versus Jews, and we're never going to live in peace and harmony. Not true. Just not true. Like, the chat that I have with everyone in my estate is amazing. And it's just a lived understanding of conflict transformation, conflict resolution. And we have to just not listen to that binary discussion of what the oppressive context want us to believe. I'm a big fan of Paulo Freire, the kind of founding figure of popular education, who really unpacks the processes of dehumanization, rehumanization. And there's one kind of concept which sticks with me, which, when it comes to internalized trauma, is that if the oppressed will easily step into the shoes of the oppressor if we're not conscious, and we can easily become the ventriloquist of power, which is very, very poignant to what's going on with the anti-Semitism hit job at the moment. We're doing the oppressor's job for them.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and absolutely. You know, my family were East End of London as well. Bethnal Green mostly, as a lot were.
Yeah.
Sweet shops and tailors.
No, yeah, no, exactly. I still get all sentimental when I walk around the streets. And
Totally.
I get so sentimental. My boyfriend doesn't quite get it. And it just makes me cry just walking around the streets.
Okay. So Trisha's saying, without US empire support of Israeli apartheid, it would have great trouble. Yes, absolutely. Very good point. I absolutely agree. I mean, ditto UK support, ditto, you know, the arms trade. I mean, we're in a situation where, you know, if you're someone who wants to go and buy weapons from a UK arms dealer, they will call them battle tested because the Israeli army have used them on Gaza in 2014 during Operation Protective Edge, which is pretty sick making, really. Oh, here's a good one. Andrea asks, as a non-Jew, I find it hard to debate and explain about Palestine, etc., for fear of being accused of being an anti-Semite. How do you argue or try to get other Jewish people to listen? Why do the likes of TAO and RR, I assume that's Tracy-Ann Oberman and Rachel Riley, weaponize it? Well, I mean, we can't speak to what's in the minds of Tracy-Ann Oberman and Rachel Riley, obviously. We can speculate on why they might direct the weaponization of anti-Semitism to people like myself and people like Carrie-Anne. It could have more to do with our left-wing progressive politics and support of Palestine than it has to do with anything else. But that's speculation, of course. But how, as a non-Jewish person, can you debate and explain about Palestine without fearing being accused of being an anti-Semite?
Great question. Firstly, I'm just having a little moment. I've watched every EastEnders episode since it began in 1985, and because I'm not on Twitter, I didn't know about this Tracy-Ann Oberman situation, and I'm just having a little moment. I'm glad she's not in it anymore. I think that's a really beautiful question, Andrea, and I have a lot of friends who also say the same thing. And again, I'm just going to go, do love a quote. The Martin Niemöller quote, first they came for the communists, first they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up for them. Like, it's so important that we all speak up against the anti-Semitism hit job and for Palestinians. That's allyship. That's allyship. When we break down all of our identities, we need people to stand up for ourselves. For each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, just please don't wipe that off when people say, "Oh, you can't say that because you're not a Jew." It's like, yes, I'm a big fan of the saying, nothing about us without us is for us. That the most oppressed have to lead the struggle for liberation, but that's not mutually exclusive from allyship. If we're looking at apartheid South Africa, then there was white allyship within that. If we're looking at the feminist struggle, then there's male solidarity within that. We're looking at the trans, there's allyship, and I think we have to just not take it with not take any of that we shouldn't be speaking up.
Yeah, be proud of your allyship.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'd probably add to that, just certainly with people in my own life, I found it quite useful to just really clearly explain the distinction between Jewish people, Israelis, Zionists, and the Israeli state.
Yeah.
So being a Jewish person is, for most people, it's an ethnic and or a religious identity. Being an Israeli is being a citizen of Israel, holding an Israeli passport or identity card. That's a whole other story. We won't get into that now. The state of Israel, the Israeli government, is separate in just the way that I don't expect you to meet me, a British person, and expect me to uphold everything that Boris Johnson says and stands for. I don't expect an Israeli citizen to do the same, unless they tell me otherwise. Now, Zionism is a tricky one. You might argue with me on this or not. Some people do, some people don't. I would say that Zionism, as a fundamental idea that Jewish people, having been stateless, need a home. And I kind of have a hard time arguing really strongly against that. Political Zionism, as I coin it, I would say, is the idea that Israel as it is now, as it creeps into more and more and more and more and more of the land that belonged to Palestinians prior to 1948 is what I have a problem with. I have a problem with that. I have a problem with the way it's been done. I have a problem with taking people's homes and their land and bulldozing it in the name of some kind of reparation for the atrocities of the Second World War. Yeah, does that make some kind of sense?
Yeah, big time.
Just kind of separate those things out and know that when we're talking about the state of Israel, the Israeli government, we're not talking about Jewish people. We're not even talking about Israeli people. We might be talking about Zionists who are political Zionists and are supportive of that project.
Yeah,
I think that's probably what I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like clarity is everything, so that we don't feel like we can't speak out, because it's like there's no the Howard Zinn quote, you can't be neutral on a moving train. The occupation of Palestine is happening at such a rapid scale, and so fast. If we're looking at land occupation, the settlement increases, the exploitation of the hydrological system, it's happening on such a rapid scale. We cannot afford to not speak out. Everyone needs to speak out, because it's so tyrannical. I mean, I always say, of course, now we can't because of the pandemic, but if you can get to Palestine, do, because you have to see it with your own eyes, if you can, because there's so much propaganda. But when you see the apartheid on the ground, there's no going back. And yeah, it's been very explicit and untangling, like you say, what is Zionism, what is Judaism, what is different between Israel and the Israeli government. Like, of course, just because I'm British doesn't mean I support the British Empire and the consequence what and everything that the British government stand for or have stood for. Like, obviously not. So it's just having real clarity and pulling that apart. And everyone has the right to have their fundamental needs of belonging and security and protection met, but not at the expense of someone else, because then the cycle of violence continues. And on a very logical level, we're all interdependent on the planet. So if you because your rights have been taken, then take away someone else's, it's just going to boomerang and come back at you. So it just doesn't make any logical level to transform society at large. So I just think speaking out, having clarity, and again, in the kind of spirit of activism and struggle, it's what's called the action reflection cycle. We take action and then we learn from it. So say that you've had a conversation with someone, if you're non-Jewish, and someone says, oh, how can you speak like that? You reflect on that conversation, what was good, and how can I be stronger next time when again I face this? And it will make us stronger every time, so that we have the toolkit to be able to carry on the struggle.
I think so. We've got about 2 minutes left. I'm just checking for any other questions. There's some other conversation going on in the comments, which is great. People sharing their stories from their families and what people have learned from experiences in the 30s in Europe and in South Africa as well. Thank you for sharing those stories with us. I'm sorry I can't go through all of them. Okay, 2 minutes. Is there anything that you haven't said that you want to say, Dan, or any final thoughts to leave people with?
I guess I've just got a lot of love and respect for everyone, Jewish and other, who's been in the heart of the Labour movement and standing up for Corbyn, standing up for Palestine, standing up against anti-Semitism and racism in all of its forms. I've got so much love and respect for you. Take a little break this Hanukkah. Like feed your soul and work out a way that we can carry on, which is getting involved in your local BDS group. And if you are out there and you're like, oh, I don't know how to start or where to start, there will be Palestine and migrant rights, a BDS group in your community, get involved, speak up, make some new friends, because like we referred to at the beginning in the question about, and the point about Mandela, none of us are free until Palestine is free. And so even though we're all, I'm sure, doing many things, we've got to keep the struggle for Palestine at the center of our heart, because it has ripple effects on everything. So yeah, find a way to get involved and get in touch. I'd love to do more, to do more. You can't be a presenter these days because of COVID, so I'm out of a job. So we'll find ways that we can do other presenting and other explorations in how we can continue the struggle for the freedom of Palestine.
Right. And you're running workshops and things during the next little while, and working on other projects as well. And hopefully, when we're all vaccinated, the presenting opportunities will be knocking at your door again. Dan, thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts and your insight. I'd encourage everyone to go ahead and watch the full Redfish film. And yeah, join in your local BDS and Palestine activism groups. Obviously, that doesn't happen in real life at the moment on the whole, but there's lots and lots online. And I think, bottom line for me is that really what we're talking about is radical love.
Yes. Yeah. Which will put. Yeah. Oh, and thanks to Redfish, obviously, and Canary, and every independent media platform out there who is bringing these issues to light.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, radical love. That's what we're leaving you with. Come at everything with radical love, and we'll all be fine. It'll all be fine in the end. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us in the audience. There's been a brilliant turnout across the 3 platforms. Look out for alerts for the next Canary Live event online. We're going to be running more of those as time goes on. We're also going to be launching a new video podcast in the next couple of weeks. We've got some really, really exciting guests coming up on that. That's presented by Carrie-Anne Mendoza, our editor at large. So yeah, all that remains for me to say is if you can afford it, if you feel like you want to, please support the Canary, support independent media. We now rely on funding from our readers, partly thanks to the decimation of online advertising in general, but also a little campaign called Stop Funding Fake News, which has gone after all the same people who have been gone after for alleged anti-Semitism, which did not really turn out to be anything other than vexatious on the whole. So please do support us, support independent media. There are others out there, and join us on the next Canary Live event. Thank you again to Dan, and good night, everybody.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everyone.